Modern humans panic when the heat goes out for one night. Meanwhile, Native Americans thrived through brutal winters wearing less clothing than you'd wear to a grocery store in October. They weren't tougher than us. They knew something about cold that we've been deliberately untaught. Here's something your grandpa probably knew that modern camping gear companies don't want you to remember. Native Americans didn't just build fires, they engineered them. See, most people throw some logs together, light it up, and wake up freezing at 3 in the morning, wondering where all the heat went. The flames died, the coals turned to ash, and now you're shivering like a chihuahua in a snowstorm. But indigenous peoples, they figured out something brilliant called the long fire. 2 large parallel logs laid side by side with smaller fuel burning between them. This setup didn't shoot flames straight up into the sky where they're completely useless. Instead, it radiated heat sideways, right toward the sleeping area, for 8 hours or more. And they didn't stop there. Behind the fire, they'd stack green logs or bark into a reflector wall. This bounced heat back toward their bodies, nearly doubled the warming efficiency. It's like having 2 fires for the price of 1. My grandfather would have called that a bargain. Now here's where wood selection matters. They saved hardwoods like oak and hickory specifically for overnight burns. Why? These woods produce steady, glowing coals instead of quick, dramatic flames that look impressive for 20 minutes, then leave you with nothing. The fire pits themselves were dug in a keyhole shape. Round end for the main fire, narrow trench for concentrating coals when cooking was needed. But my favorite trick? Rocks heated in the fire, wrapped in hide, then tucked at the feet inside sleeping bundles. These natural hot water bottles stayed warm for 5 to 6 hours through the absolute coldest nights. Before sleep, they'd bank the fire with ash, just enough to reduce oxygen flow and keep coals alive until morning without burning through all the wood. Smart, right? But fire was only half the battle. What they put on their skin might surprise you even more. Here's the thing about animal fat that most people completely miss. Native tribes across Alaska and Canada didn't just survive brutal winters, they worked in them, hunted in them. And their secret weapon? Rendered bear, seal, or caribou fat rubbed directly onto exposed skin. Sounds gross, right? But it worked better than anything we've invented since. This fat layer could raise effective skin temperature by 5 to 8 degrees in harsh wind. Why? Because it blocks evaporative cooling. Wind can't strip heat from skin that's protected by a layer of grease, and they didn't stop at skin. Fat was rubbed into leather boots and mittens to prevent moisture absorption. Wet leather loses heat fast. Greased leather stays dry. Simple physics, but brilliantly applied. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Inuit hunters could work barehanded for short periods in sub-zero temperatures after applying seal oil. Barehanded. In conditions that would give most of us frostbite in minutes. The oil created a barrier that kept wind from touching skin directly. Unlike modern petroleum jelly, animal fat stayed pliable in extreme cold. Petroleum products crack and get brittle when temperatures really drop. Animal fat stays soft and workable no matter how cold it gets. My grandfather used to grease his hands with bacon fat before doing winter farm chores. We thought he was crazy. Turns out he was just old school smart. The funny part, military units in cold weather operations have quietly returned to lanolin-based skin protectants. Lanolin comes from sheep wool. It's basically animal fat with a fancier name and better marketing. We spent decades developing synthetic alternatives, expensive ones, chemical ones, and now we're circling back to what worked for thousands of years, but fat wasn't the only body hack natives understood. They also knew exactly where heat escapes fastest from the human body. And their solution was almost too simple. Here's something that'll make you rethink everything about staying warm. Most people bundle up their chest first, throw on a heavy coat, maybe a hat. But Native Americans, they went straight for the wrists and ankles before anything else. Sounds backwards, right? Turns out blood vessels at these spots run almost directly under the skin. We're talking millimeters from the surface. So when cold air hits your wrists, it's basically refrigerating your blood supply in real time. That chilled blood then pumps throughout your entire body. Every few seconds, you're circulating ice water through your system. The woodland tribes figured this out centuries ago. They wrapped fur strips around wrists and ankles first, not the chest, not even the head. The pulse points came before everything, and the numbers backed them up. You can lose up to 10% of your total body heat through exposed wrists alone. 10%. That's like leaving a window cracked open in your house all winter and wondering why the heating bill is insane. The Cherokee took this even further. They made detachable fur cuffs that could be tightened during rest and loosened during activity. Why? Because sweating into your insulation is a death sentence we'll get to later. These cuffs gave them temperature control that some modern jackets still haven't figured out. Then there's the Athabascan approach. Double-wrapped rabbit fur ankle bands. Not because cold toes were the problem. Cold ankles were the problem. The feet just suffered the consequences. Here's what kills me about this. Your grandmother probably told you to wear long sleeves. Keep your wrists covered. Pull your socks up high. She wasn't being fussy. She was passing down wisdom that originated with people who survived winters that would have killed most of us in a week. But protecting these thermal gateways only works if your clothing isn't actively working against you. Here's the thing about tight clothing that drives me crazy. We've spent decades convincing ourselves that compression gear and skin-tight base layers are the pinnacle of cold weather technology. Meanwhile, Native Americans figured out the real physics centuries ago, and they did it without a single laboratory. Loose clothing wins, every time. Why? Because still air is your best friend in winter. Air that isn't moving insulates 25 times better than air that's circulating. That's not an opinion. That's physics. Inuit parkas weren't form-fitting fashion statements. They were designed with a 2 to 3 inch gap between the inner and outer layer. Basically, a wearable thermos. The body heats that trapped air, and it just stays there, doing its job, not going anywhere. The Plains tribes, same idea, different approach. Their buffalo robes draped loosely rather than wrapping tight. They looked bulky, almost sloppy by European standards. But those sloppy robes kept hunters alive through prairie winters that killed plenty of well-dressed explorers. Now here's where modern clothing actually betrays us. Those expensive compression base layers everyone swears by, they reduce insulation value by up to 40% compared to loose alternatives. You're literally paying extra to be colder. My grandfather would have called that fancy foolishness. The Cree people had a saying that roughly translates to, tight clothes make cold bones. No thermodynamics degree, no wind tunnel testing. Just observation passed down through generations. And they were absolutely right. Blood flow matters too. Tight clothing restricts circulation, which means less warm blood reaching your extremities. So you're eliminating the air buffer and cutting off your body's natural heating system. Double penalty. But trapping warm air is only half the survival equation, because there's something natives understood about the ground itself that most people still get completely wrong. Here's something that seems completely backwards. When it's freezing outside, the smartest move isn't building up, it's digging down. 18 inches below your feet, the ground stays between 50 and 55 degrees year-round. Doesn't matter if it's July or January. Doesn't matter if the air above is 40 below zero. That soil keeps its temperature like a stubborn old man who refuses to change his thermostat. Native peoples figured this out thousands of years ago. Plains tribes and Arctic communities dug sleeping pits inside their shelters. Not deep holes. Just enough to drop below that layer of cold air that pools along the ground like an invisible frozen lake. And they didn't stop there. These depressions got lined with dried grass or pine needles, adding another 10 to 15 degrees of insulation value from below. Basically, a mattress that actually does something useful. Now here's what most people get wrong about cold weather. They pile blankets on top, but sleep directly on frozen ground. Big mistake. Huge. The ground steals heat 50 times faster than cold air does. 50 times. You could have the world's warmest sleeping bag and still wake up hypothermic because the earth underneath is robbing you blind. The Pawnee built their earth lodges with recessed sleeping areas around the edges. Everyone slept in that warmer underground zone while cold air settled in the center. Pretty clever for folks without YouTube survival channels. I tried sleeping on bare ground once during a winter camping trip. Once. Woke up shivering so hard I thought I was having a seizure. My buddy, who dug a shallow pit and stuffed it with leaves, slept like a baby, made me feel real smart. Let me tell you, modern survival experts now teach pit building as priority number one. Took us centuries to circle back to indigenous wisdom. But staying warm below ground only works if you're dry. And that brings us to the real silent killer that natives understood better than anyone. Here's the thing nobody talks about when it comes to surviving cold. It's not the wind, it's not the snow, it's your own body betraying you. Sweat, the silent killer. Native hunters figured this out centuries ago. They knew that working up a sweat in freezing temperatures was basically a death sentence in slow motion. So they did something that drove European observers absolutely crazy. They walked slower than they needed to, on purpose. See, wet clothing loses up to 90% of its insulation value. 90%. You could be wearing the warmest buffalo robe ever made, but the moment it gets damp from your own perspiration, you might as well be wearing a wet bed sheet. The Ojibwe had specific trail rules for this. Walk until you feel warmth building in your chest, then immediately stop and vent. Open your clothing. Let that heat escape before moisture forms against your skin. Sounds backwards, right? Letting heat out to stay warm. But it worked. Inuit hunters would actually strip off layers during physical exertion, in sub-zero temperatures, while Europeans watching probably thought they'd lost their minds. And here's the clever part. Many tribes designed their clothing with quick opening chest flaps, not for fashion, for survival. These were emergency release valves for body heat. Dump the warmth before it turns into sweat. I learned this the hard way on a winter hike years ago. Pushed too hard, got sweaty, then stopped to rest. Within 20 minutes, I was shivering so badly my teeth hurt. My grandfather would have called that earning your education the expensive way. Modern mountaineers have a fancy term for this now. They call it purposeful pacing. Indigenous peoples just called it common sense. But managing moisture is only half the battle, because there's a wild plant that could save your life in a blizzard. Here's the thing about cattail fluff. It's basically nature's down jacket, just sitting there in every marsh across the continent. And almost nobody today even knows it exists. Native tribes figured this out thousands of years ago. They'd harvest those brown, fuzzy cattail heads and stuff the fluff into moccasins, mittens, even sleeping materials. The thermal rating? Comparable to goose down. Let that sink in. Free insulation growing in every wetland, performing like the expensive stuff in your fancy winter jacket. One mature cattail head produces enough fluff to insulate both your boots for an entire day of walking on frozen ground. Both boots from one plant. My grandfather used to say the best things in life are free. He was talking about sunsets, but he should have been talking about cattails. Now here's where it gets interesting. Modern synthetic insulation falls apart when it gets wet. Useless. Cattail fluff? It retains most of its warmth even when damp. In wet snow conditions, that's not a small advantage. That's the difference between comfortable and hypothermic. The Paiute and Shoshone peoples took this even further. They wove entire blankets from cattail leaves, then stuffed them with the fluff inside. These blankets had our values matching modern sleeping bags. No factories, no petroleum products, just plants from the swamp. And the best part? You can harvest cattail even in early winter when the heads turn brown and everything else is dead. The timing works perfectly when you need it most. Survival instructors still teach cattail harvesting today, not as some quaint historical footnote either. They teach it because it genuinely works. One of the most effective natural insulators you'll find anywhere in the wild, and it grows in marshes from Canada to Mexico. But insulation only gets you halfway there. What the natives did with fire placement, that's where the real genius shows up. Here's the thing about campfires that nobody tells you. Half your heat disappears into the darkness behind the flames. Just gone. Warming up trees and rocks that don't need it. Native peoples figured this out pretty quick. Their solution? Build a wall, not a fancy wall, just logs stacked up, rocks piled together, or packed snow behind the fire. Simple physics, really. Heat radiates outward in all directions, but a solid surface bounces it back like a mirror reflects light. The result? You effectively double your fire's warming power without adding a single extra stick of wood. The Algonquin took this further. They'd build a long fire, position a reflector wall on one side, then sleep in that narrow corridor between. They called it sleeping between two fires, even though there was only one actual fire burning. Clever, right? But the angle matters more than most people realize. A straight-up wall sends heat right back at the flames. Wasteful. The sweet spot is around 45 degrees, which angles the heat downward toward where people actually sit or sleep. I tried this myself last winter, built a messy little wall from fallen branches. Honestly, looked terrible. My wife laughed at it, but sitting between that fire and my ugly wall, the temperature difference was obvious. Maybe 15 or 20 degrees warmer than sitting at an open campfire. And here's what surprised me most. This works with any heat source. Modern camp stoves, those little propane heaters. Even a candle in a survival situation throws more useful heat with a reflector behind it. No batteries, no special gear, just understanding how heat moves through space. Speaking of moving heat where you need it, there's another native innovation that seems completely backwards. Their boots were soft and floppy when European boots were stiff and sturdy. Turns out the Europeans had it exactly wrong. Here's something that drove European explorers crazy. They'd march into the Arctic wearing their finest leather boots. Stiff, sturdy, the pride of European craftsmanship, and they'd lose their toes within weeks. Meanwhile, natives walked around in what looked like oversized leather socks. Soft, floppy, almost comically simple. Guess whose feet survived? The difference comes down to two things: blood flow and conduction. A hard boot sole works like a metal plate strapped to your foot. It pulls heat straight out of your body and dumps it into the frozen ground. Every step, you're basically standing on a refrigerator shelf. Soft hide soles, they create a tiny air cushion with each footfall. That cushion breaks the thermal bridge between your warm foot and the cold earth. But here's what really matters. Stiff boots squeeze your feet, and squeezed feet lose blood circulation. Less blood means less warmth delivered to your toes. Your body is literally trying to heat your feet, but the boot is choking off the supply line. Inuit Mukluks had up to 7 separate layers: outer hide, inner hide, grass insulation, sometimes moss. The boots were deliberately oversized. Why? So you could stuff extra material inside and still wiggle your toes. Wiggling toes means blood is moving. Blood moving means warmth. I learned this the hard way on a winter camping trip. Bought the most expensive insulated boots I could find. Tight fit, very technical looking. My feet were ice blocks by noon. And get this, the military eventually figured it out too. Forces stationed in Alaska kept having cold weather injuries until they ditched standard combat boots for Mukluk-style designs. Took them decades to accept what natives knew for millennia. Tight equals cold. Loose equals warm. Now, footwear is one thing, but there's another survival secret that sounds completely backwards. Using snow to stay warm. Here's something that sounds completely backwards. When it's freezing outside, the best thing you can wrap yourself in might be the cold stuff falling from the sky. Snow is basically 95% trapped air. That's it. Tiny pockets of nothing held in place by ice crystals. And air that can't move, that's insulation gold. The Inuit figured this out thousands of years ago. Their igloos could hit 60 degrees inside using nothing but body heat and a small oil lamp. Outside, minus 40. That's a 100-degree difference created by frozen water. Try explaining that to someone who just spent $300 on a high-tech sleeping bag. But wait, it gets weirder. A properly built quinzhee, that's a hollowed-out snow mound, stays around 32 degrees inside no matter how brutal the temperature drops outside. Not warm by beach vacation standards, but when the alternative is minus 40, 32 feels like a tropical resort. Plains tribes used this knowledge differently. They didn't build full snow shelters, but they piled snow against the base of their teepees every winter. The elders knew that white powder blocked drafts better than adding more hide layers. Cheaper, too. Snow was free. And here's where most people mess up. Your instinct when you see snow piling against a shelter is to brush it off. Keep things clean. Natives would have thought you'd lost your mind. That snowbank isn't a problem. It's a feature. You're literally throwing away free insulation. I learned this the hard way on a winter camping trip, spent 20 minutes clearing snow from my tent base, froze all night. The guy next to me let the snow pile up, slept like a baby. Makes sense when you think about it. The ground itself steals heat way faster than air does. Speaking of ground contact, the animals natives wrapped themselves in weren't chosen randomly. Now here's where things get interesting. Not all fur is created equal, and Native Americans knew exactly which animal to hunt for which purpose. Caribou fur? That stuff is basically nature's cheat code. Each hair shaft is completely hollow, filled with trapped air. Pound for pound, it's warmer than almost anything else you'll find in the wild. Your fancy synthetic jacket wishes it could perform this well. Beaver pelts served a completely different job. The underfur is so dense it naturally holds oil that repels water. Perfect for boots and mittens where moisture is your worst enemy. There's a reason beaver hats became so valuable that entire wars were fought over them. But here's something I never knew until recently. Wolf and wolverine fur was specifically used around hood edges. Why? Because these furs resist frost buildup from your breath. Every other fur will ice up around your face during a blizzard, making you look like a frozen Santa Claus. Not wolverine fur, though. Rabbit was the gentle choice. Lightweight, incredibly soft, ideal for wrapping babies or keeping sick elders comfortable. The catch? It wore out fast. You wouldn't take rabbit fur on a hunting expedition any more than you'd wear your Sunday shoes to dig ditches. Then there's buffalo. Those robes weighed around 15 pounds, which sounds miserable until you realize they could keep someone alive on the open prairie in sub-zero temperatures. No shelter, no fire, just you and that massive furry blanket between you and death. And moose hide for moccasin soles? Brilliant choice. It stayed flexible when temperatures dropped so low that deer hide would crack like old leather. Nothing ruins your day faster than your boots falling apart 20 miles from camp. Each animal, each purpose. They matched materials to conditions with the precision of an engineer. No guesswork involved.